in work and life today. More youngsters are open to delay employment in order to wait for their dream job. Because of the change in mindset, because of them being more selective and more reluctant to compromise on what they want. And their parents are also more willing and obliging for this wait. Some of them even give them pocket money during the wait. In fact, I know of people who still get pocket money from their parents even after they got a job, and well-paying jobs. Yeah, so time has changed a lot. In the past, there may be more urgency for graduates to look for a job right after graduation because they need to support their families or they need to feed themselves, but times have changed. And with recent times, employees and employers are both getting more selective. When the employees are getting more selective in what job to take, employers are also getting more selective in who to hire, especially if the economy is not doing that well, especially if their organization is not doing that well. It is impossible and unrealistic to expect people today to act like people in the past. So we have to adapt and move on. How should we adapt and move on? Here are some considerations and actions to take. We should break stereotyping of jobs, and we should professionalize non-desk-bound jobs. Non-desk-bound jobs are jobs that are more hands-on and more outdoor-based. So they may not be low-skill jobs, low-cost jobs. It really depends. When these jobs are more recognized and more professionalized, these jobs have more sophistication, higher salary, and better branding. So more people will be willing and able to join these jobs, join these sectors. These jobs can cover things like civil works, carpentry, culinary, farming, sports, etc. Next, we should be more open to specialist tracks, not just management tracks. Many people have this perception that it is better, more profitable, more lucrative, and more reputable to go into management tracks. But actually, to be a top specialist or to be a technical expert in a field may not have less standing or less income than the top admin executive. For example, I think now we always say that there is a lack of manpower in the IT sector for Singapore. I think this is a yes and no answer. Yes, we need more technical talent in the IT sector now, but we also have this problem of outflow of IT talent due to their preference of management tracks. Some of the programmers, analysts, specialists, they actually switch to join the admin management track after working in the technical track for a few years because they feel that this track is cushier, it's more comfortable. And so it's not just about attracting more people to the technical field, it is also about retaining existing people from the technical field. The government needs to modify conventional policy and structures to meet the growth of the higher diversity of employment. In the past, most people are full-time salaried workers. Now we have more and more types of employment. Some people like to be freelancer or contractor or part-timer or home-based businessman. So the government has to change policies and structures to fit accordingly. For example, policies on company registration, policies on CPF, policy on taxes, policy on housing. All these have to change to fit the new landscape of jobs. To inculcate foundation of broad-based aptitudes and mental resilience from childhood so that you can be prepared for future challenges and future changes in whatever nature, in whatever field. Creativity and innovation are the key attribute of the future. But you cannot expect to develop creativity just by attending that one day or 1 week creativity workshop, or just by having some creativity activities in school. Creativity must flow in your blood, must be tied to your daily life. Are you curious about what is around you? Do you do DIY repairs? Do you create your own gadgets and toys? Do you like to solve problems? If you do have this sense and interest, you will not have that in-depth and fundamental curiosity and tinkering to have that innovation mindset. Do not neglect the value of cross-disciplinary knowledge and polymath thinking, because now everything is getting more interrelated and require multitasking. You shouldn't just focus on your major, but you need to know much more. So for example, if you want to set up a biomedical company, you need knowledge in biology, IT, engineering, law, finance, management, etc. Many, many more. Essentially, we should address education and societal fundamentals, like how we view a person, how we view education, what are the priorities of society, because all this ultimately affect the internal motivation of people to learn and progress. Whatever the case, it is always important to have competence, diligence, and attitude, regardless of the pathway taken. You have to be good in something. Then something may be related to academic, may not be related to academic, never mind. You must be good with something so that you have a selling point in the world. If you do not put in effort, if you do not have positive attitude, it is hard to go far wherever you are. The slide here shows the so-called toolbox of intrinsic abilities. So these are things or competencies that everyone should have and try to develop, regardless of what you want to do and which job you're aiming at. So they are like general competencies to help you learn more things in future. So next time you may want to change job or change task, it will help you to adapt and acquire that future specific kind of task related skills. So it's like a general toolbox for you to learn more things in future. You need to have more skills and knowledge in a broad range. You need a big range of skills and knowledge to progress. So, for example, you need to have knowledge for technical domains, problem-solving skills, management skills, soft skills, etc. What you learn in your major only cover this first line. All the others have to be learned elsewhere. The slide here and the slide next, coming next, are trying to show some possible differences in work characteristics and work preferences of different generations. So different generations may have different characteristics and preferences here and also mentioned over here. So essentially, these examples show that there are more and more types of people present in the work environment now, because the period defining a generation is getting shorter and shorter. So you have many generations working at the same time along the same dimension. These different generations have differences in needs, personalities, strengths, weaknesses, and styles. So it is getting more difficult for the government and the bosses to manage this huge diversity of people. Something you do may satisfy the older generation, but not the younger ones, and vice versa. So it is harder for bosses to shape and gel its organization. It is harder for the government to shape and gel the entire workforce. Okay, so now we will talk about wages, something that is close to your heart. So this is the change in income value for work of full-time employed in Singapore over the years. When you see the word gross here, it means before taking inflation into account. So this is the gross number you see on your payslip. when you look at number, make sure you look at the title head clearly. So it covers full-time employed. So it excludes part-time workers, temporary workers, ad hoc workers, jobless people, and whatsoever. So if you include all those different kinds of workers and people in Singapore, these numbers would likely be smaller. Then, before I move on, I would like to highlight and remind that there are different meanings to different population definition for Singapore. Because people always get confused what residents means and what citizens mean. So when we talk about Singapore population, it includes citizens, PRs, and non-residents. Non-residents refer to non-PR foreigners. When I talk about residents, it includes citizens and PRs. When I talk about citizens, it includes citizens only. From here, you can see that the value for residents will be higher than the value for citizens. So typically, the income value will get higher when we add the PR into the calculation. Then, if you look at the lower income people of the 20th percentile, you can see that their salary is about over 2K now, as mentioned here. But this is only a very generic representation. In actual fact, many ground jobs earn much less than that. So if we have some examples of here, if you look at people from the cleaning, security, and landscape industry, most of these ground workers only earn about 1.2 to 1.3K. And those people with supervisory role will earn around 1.8K. So you cannot just see these numbers because it applies in general terms, but when you go to specific sectors and specific jobs, the picture may be different. Then this chart shows the percentage change in income. So it's a percentage type of chart. When you see the word real, it means after taking inflation into account. Similarly, this is for work for full-time employed. If you look at the numbers here, you can see that there was certain time whereby the lower income people had their salary stagnating or reducing for more than 10, 15 or 20 years. When you see the number in negative here, so negative 0.6 means that the salary decreases by 0.6% every year for 5 years. When you see 0.1 here, it means that the salary is almost unchanged every year for 10 years. So in relation, there's this statement over here, I think this is found in your reading on Canvas as well. The real median income of bottom 10 percentile fell by 9% during these few years. To put this number into context, let us compare this number with the income of other people in Singapore. So during this period of time, the bottom 10% had minus 9% income growth, meaning income shrink or reduced by 9%. The 20th percentile had salary shrink by 2%. But at the same time, you have your rich people having salary increase by almost 20%, and you have GDP increase by about 50 to 60%. So there is this time whereby you have your poor people having their salary shrinking or laying flat, while Singapore GDP was booming in economy when the rich people are having a big rise in salary. Recently, if you look at the numbers here, it looks better for the lower income group. There's some higher percentage increase in salary. It may be due to the initiatives like Workfare. Workfare may contribute some of the increase. The fall in prices in several years may also contribute to this increase because it factors in inflation. If you look at the discussion question earlier on CPI, we have said that from 2014 to 2016, prices are always dropping. During COVID-19 pandemic, many months prices are dropping. So they may also make this percentage look higher because it factors in inflation. Whatever the case, you cannot be too happy or excited to see salary increment for the lower income because their income has been reduced by so long and so much. You increase 3% for $1,000, it's only increased by $30. There's nothing much to be very happy about. And besides, even though these numbers look nice, as I said in the previous slide, it may not be applicable to all sectors. So the overall wage growth for many years here may look decent, but wage growth is actually very uneven for certain sectors. So you have certain sectors up till now having salaries stagnating or reducing for more than 10 years, 15 years or 20 years. Imagine you have salary being the same for 20 years and you know how can they survive in this current state of high inflation. Then there is this figure, this number is also from a reading from Canvas. It says that the wage of bottom 20 percentile is 54% of wage of 50th percentile. This is a relatively low percentage because other more developed countries have much higher percentage. So this shows the low income of the poor people in Singapore and the strong inequality in Singapore as well. As we know, COVID-19 pandemic has hurt jobs and hurt salary for many people, but this hurt is manifested in a disproportionate and uneven manner, whereby the lower income people suffer much more. So you can see that during the worst time of COVID-19 pandemic, the percentage drop in income for the poor people is much higher than the other groups of people. These numbers are further reinforced by the study over here. So this study is based on applicants to certain family assistance fund. So the respondents of this study are common folk who are always needy, and also common folk who are not considered poor by government definition, but they are falling through the cracks. So if you look at here, you can see that by the numbers, it reinforces the fact that lower income groups have bigger loss in percentage when it comes to income during the pandemic. And in fact, more than 1/3 of them have household income reduced to zero due to the pandemic. Here are some primary factors affecting wage growth. So what can cause increase in your salary? The three main factors would be rise in productivity, rise in wage share, rise in prices. When you look at the word nominal, nominal has a similar meaning like gross. So it means the value before factoring inflation. So if you have decrease in this, you have more wages. If you remember from the previous lesson, we have said that the government prefers to keep wage share low and unchanged. Just now we have said that productivity in Singapore is dipping at low levels. If this is low, it means that most of your salary increase is caused by the increase of prices on goods and services sold by your bosses. When your salary increases because of price increases, there is no point. There is no true value. When your salary increases by $2 and your food increases by $2, you are only able to buy what you used to be able to buy. You cannot buy more things, you cannot buy better things. Besides, as we have seen in previous lessons, a country must maintain price stability. You cannot have the prices keep increasing and increasing non-stop in the country. So you cannot keep relying on price increase to have wage increase. If this is the case, it means that it is really important for us to work on productivity in order for you to get more salary increment. Yeah. If this is something that the government does not want to touch. In particular, productivity is a prominent weakness of Singapore. It's not just an optional area of improvement that we can choose. So it is really something that you should work more on, and because it is low, if you do some improvement, there's more room for improvement and more room for increase. The rank and file jobs in Singapore are typically held by lower and middle class workers, as shown here, and their wage levels are generally much lower than those holding similar jobs in other developed countries. So Singapore is in orange here. So you can see that the salary for Singapore for these rank and file jobs are significantly lower than other countries. We have said just now that there is a systemic presence of stagnant low wages in some sectors. So these sectors are the sectors whereby I say they will have stagnant wages for more than 10, 15, 20 years. Their salary should be improved in the long run through structural reforms for the sake of better social mobility and economic well-being. But you cannot just increase their wages like that without basis. So you need to have some reason and some method to raise their wages constructively. First, you can try to increase productivity. If their jobs have better productivity, a person can do more things and produce more things based on the same effort, you can increase salary. Just now as we see the chart, if you increase productivity, you can increase wages. So the bosses, the government should look at improving job design, improving work processes, improving technology use, improving skills level in order to allow this productivity. Next, we should look into professionalizing the nature of these jobs and recognizing the skill and demand factor of these jobs when it comes to pay scale. When you professionalize these jobs, as I said before just now, this job will have better sophistication and better value add. So it can justify higher salary. Besides, when you professionalize these jobs, it is not just creating more salary, it also creates better job scopes and better image for these jobs. So you will have better talent joining this sector, joining these jobs, and these occupations can flourish better. If you look at the construction workers and maintenance workers in many developed countries, they are not the low-skill, low-end workers which mainly rely on group energy. They are actually quite skilled. They use quite complex equipment and methods. They do a variety of tasks. They have very neat work environment. They have ownership in their work. This is quite different from Singapore. Yeah, I've witnessed this from both sides personally. You should recognize skill demand factor more in salary payment. So, in basic economics, when the demand for something is high, but the supply for something is low, typically the price for something will rise, right? But this is not the case for the rank and file jobs for Singapore. The demand for the workers are high, the supply for these workers are low, but the bosses are not inclined to pay more salary. They don't want to pay more salary to the better locals and the better foreigners. They prefer to find cheaper foreigners in elsewhere, which may not fit the job as well. So some better foreigners get demoralized, better locals also get demoralized. When you look at the construction workers for other developed countries, they are not very lowly paid. Not only because they have decent skill level, it is also because there is substantial demand for these jobs, for these workers. There is demand for the workers, but many people do not want to take up the jobs. So the bosses would not pay too low a salary in order to attract people to come to join this workforce. This is not the case for Singapore now, and for many years. So Singapore should stop overbanking too much on intensive quantity of low-cost, low-skilled labor, because it limits the progression of both the companies and the workers. The companies do not move up, the workers do not move up. It is not conducive for the workers, because all workers, be it foreign workers or local workers, desire and deserve a fruitful job with reasonable pay. Next, we'll talk something more about inequality in Singapore. So the Singapore society is not that egalitarian, so there is quite high income inequality and also wealth inequality in Singapore. So I have some numbers to show that. So if this is the income distribution of Singapore over the years since independence, you can see that the top 10% of the population takes up about half of the income in Singapore. The bottom half only takes up 16%. And if you look at the trend over the time, you can see that the income percentage, the income share of the rich people is increasing with time. And then if you look at the blue line, the income share of the bottom 50% is decreasing with time. So richer getting richer, normal people not getting richer. Wealth inequality is likely more serious than income inequality in Singapore, because wealth covers not just income but also other kind of assets. So if you look at these numbers here, top 10% of the population takes up about 62% of wealth in Singapore. But we poor 50% at the bottom just share 5%. And if you look at reiteration of the previous point made, there's no real income growth for the bottom 30% for many, many years, more than 10 years, 15 years or so. The inequalities in income and wealth for Singapore is not a recent phenomenon. It has been happening and present for decades. You can see from the charts over here and the numbers over here. So all along, since independence, this trend is visible. In contrast, for other countries like US, UK, Japan, etc., the income share for the rich people were lie quite low and flat in the early years before they start to rise more gradually after 1980s. So, as mentioned just now, wealth inequality is expected to be higher than income inequality. And here are some possible contributors to aggravate inequality in Singapore. So, rise in globalization is one thing. Perhaps I can combine these 2 points into one. Due to globalization, you got all kinds of manpower in Singapore. For the low-end, low-skilled jobs, the bosses have the tendency to hire as cheap labor as possible. So if local workers are not cheap enough, they will hire foreign workers. If foreign workers from country A is not cheap enough, I will hire from country B and country C, country D. So you will keep pushing down the salaries owned by the low-skilled, low-level people. So I will try to make it as cheap as possible. So this group of people, be it from local or foreign sources, their salary will either stay flat or go lower and lower. But the situation is opposite for those in the higher-end sector and higher-skilled jobs. For high-end sectors, high-skilled jobs, the bosses want to pay a premium to attract talent. If New York is offering them 1.1 million, then maybe Singapore wants to offer 1.2 billion, 1 million, sorry, billion. So it will keep rising higher because you want to compete with the global market for global talent. So the salary for this group of people will go higher and higher. So you keep increasing the salary here and you keep compressing the salary here, and hence the gap will keep becoming bigger and inequality gap becomes wider. Besides, when you have globalization, Singapore will have those export-oriented sectors like finance, as I said just now, whereby these sectors would serve the world, and these sectors are where all these rich assets, rich resources are concentrated. So these sectors would have a lot of high earners and a lot of income and a lot of wealth. In contrast, you have all those laid-back sectors that focus on simple cost cutting. They just want to live their life, and hence their revenue, the salary of the workers, everything are kept at the bottom. So with this dual economy happening, inequality further widens. And unfortunately, Singapore is a global city, so the effects of inequality will be strongly felt than other kinds of cities. Global cities have higher cost of living. This is unavoidable. But for other countries, their global cities are very expensive to survive. The people can move out and stay in the suburbs or other states whereby costs are cheaper and life is less stressful. But Singapore is both a country and a global city. You have nowhere to escape. The cost of living is quite similar even you escape to Choa Chu Kang or you escape to Pulau Ubin. So the poorer people have to live with it, even if they cannot afford it. So they have to suffer or experience the effects of inequality more strongly than other countries with high inequality. When it comes to skill bias technology change, we are talking about the previous part on job polarization. Just now you can refer to the previous lesson, the previous section where we say how the technology change cause job polarization and hence wider inequality. So we have said that it will cause high premium to high-skilled jobs, hollowing of low mid-skill jobs, and pressurizing of low-skill jobs. Therefore, gig economy, as you know, gig economy, people are paid by assignment, by gig. So many of these jobs are requiring simple skills. They do not have fixed income. They lack staff benefits and rights. They force job bids of cheaper quotes. So many workers from the gig economy can earn enough to survive, but they cannot earn more or to get salary increment. Meritocracy will be mentioned later in other slides. The fiscal philosophy of the government focuses on having prudent government spending, having high government savings, having individual responsibility in life. Although there may be some help given to help the disadvantaged people, sometimes the amount of help given may not be enough. Or sometimes the way help is given may not be most conducive. Singapore seems to have more and more types of choices present in terms of education, healthcare, technology, and all sorts of material goodies. But are all people accessible to these choices? It seems that some choices may be more accessible to the more privileged people as compared to the others. So some people can only see the choices they cannot touch. The choices are out of reach from them. For example, in education, you have many choices in education, but certain choices may be more reserved and more applicable to those who are more well off and more privileged. Yes, everyone has education, but to be honest, the quality of education really differs between schools due to the resources and methods used. the top elite schools are dominated by students from richer background and from alumni background. So I think the government is trying to recognize this issue and do some changes about it. The government focused a lot on economic growth and a lot on attraction of MNCs and FDI. So for a long time, it has a preference for trickle-down economics. For more information, you can go through the reading and canvas. In simple terms, the government favors wealthy locals and foreigners by giving them a lot of benefits and goodies in hope that their spendings and businesses can somehow add vibrancy to the Singapore economy. And this added vibrancy can somehow cascade down to the lower classes and somehow create value and jobs to the lower classes. However, it has been proven around the world that trickle-down economics are not working. Why? The government thinks that the economic activities of the rich can somehow cascade downwards to the lower classes and create jobs and value to the lower classes. But the process of doing this is too convoluted with too many twists and turns. Many things can happen in the process that prevent the desired outcomes from being achieved. And the rich people may not behave the way expected by the government. So you think that there will be cascading of effect in the end, not really. So just now I said that we will talk about the contribution of meritocracy in inequality. So this slide provide more words about it so that I do not need to talk so much. So this slide tries to mention how meritocracy may be a secondary, indirect aggravator of inequality in Singapore. There are various reasons mentioned over here. Due to the interpretation of meritocracy by some people, these people may have the sense of entitlement that all their rewards gained should be kept within themselves. Because they think that all the rewards are caused by their own diligence, ability, ambition, etc. So they are less thankful of the resources and help given by others. They think that my achievement is totally by myself, and hence it is fair that I keep all the rewards by myself. When you are less thankful of others, you are not willing to repay others. You are not willing to share your rewards with others. They ignore the fact that the government, the parents, the employees help to create your contribution and achievements. So they are not willing to pay family allowance, they are not willing to pay government taxes, they are not willing to pay fair salaries to workers because they think that what I gain should be kept by myself. And due to the way people inculcate the notion of meritocracy, some people may be less sorry and less helpful towards the disadvantaged people who may not fare well in life. They may label these people who not fare well in life as lazy, incapable, or laid back. To them, I am out there earning so much because I am very capable, I'm very diligent, I'm very ambitious. You are down there earning very little because you are lazy, you are not hardworking, you are not capable. Fair what? So if it's fair, why should I help you? It's fair that you are down there. But in actual fact, these people are down there, many of them are not lazy, they are not incapable, they are not laid back. But rather they are restricted by disadvantages caused by their birth backgrounds and family backgrounds. They may have inferior starting points. So if you are not helping them, then how can they move up? In the end, many of the less endowed people will have less opportunities, they will have less development of their potential to become real capable people. So you have a close group of winners. we said that meritocracy rewards ability, but in reality, in Singapore now, ability is affected by what resources you have, what connections you have, what genes you have. In relation, there is also the norm in Singapore to reward narrow types of ability. We said that we should reward ability, but how can you measure ability? The way of measure ability tends to be very narrow. It's more restrictive towards courses, certificates, and status. So you may not get your due reward, even though you're capable, you're hardworking, just because you lack the qualifications or the official status. It's also the norm to reward relative ability more than absolute ability. So if you score 80 marks in your test, you should be very happy, because 80 marks means A grade. You are strong in ability. But you may not be happy if all your classmates score 90 marks or 100 marks. You are last in class. So it does not matter that you are strong in ability. It matters more if you are doing better or worse than others. So even if you are strong in ability, you will not get the rewards because you are not better than the others. So because of this, people in Singapore will focus too much on rankings. And there is also this trend of hyper competition. Competition is good, too much competition is bad. When you have too much competition, people are more selfish, they are less cooperative, they do not want to share with others, they do want to work with others because they are scared that the fellow colleagues or the fellow classmates will do better than them. And if you don't work together, your project cannot become better. How can Singapore become better in economy? Last but not least, if the system in Singapore moves to this unfortunate situation whereby those people with more ability are those people who are richer or have better background, then you may have these people dominating the high positions in government. And they are the people creating policies for the masses. They may lack understanding of the brown masses who live life very different from them. And if that is the case, the policies may not be that suitable. So these are just some good quotes to repeat and add on to the points mentioned just now. So I think one important point mentioned by the Nalki is that if this is the situation, if you want meritocracy to be fair, those who are the luckiest with all those goodies should have the greatest responsibility to work hard, to contribute to the betterment of the world, and to share the love with others. Inequality is a serious global issue waiting for explosion. So these are some information to show the amount of inequality present. And the inequality present in the world in many countries are mainly due to deficiencies in governance, like how the government manages tax, labor, social, and other policies. So if you look at just the chart over here, you can see that corporate taxes and wealth taxes targeted at the rich are decreasing with time. Personal income taxes and GST targeted at common folk are increasing with time. So the rich people are paying less taxes, the poor people are paying more taxes in a general sense. And as mentioned just now for case of Singapore, it also applies to the world as well. The lower income group are more affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. They suffer more income loss and job loss as compared to the others, and this aggravates the income inequality and wealth inequality more. These examples are just trying to show that there is really a substantial number of people in Singapore struggling at the bottom end of the social ladder, even for basic necessities like food. Without basic equipment in technology, they are unable to have proper education and proper employment, especially during the pandemic when work from home and study from home are compulsory. And inequality in Singapore does not only apply to locals, but it also applies to foreigners. You have a lot of foreigner people suffering from inequality in Singapore as well. Too much inequality brings harm. So here are some bad effects, some disadvantages of inequality. So you have bad effects from economic sense, social sense, and political sense. It says here that you have too much inequality, you would have reduction in consumer demand and consumption. There is a reading on Canvas that explains this, so the explanation is quite good, you can refer to it. With too much inequality, the individual potential to contribute to the economy may not be fully realized because the people being disadvantaged are being left out or shut off from opportunities due to poor background or poor playing field. Then, if being at the lower class is so scary, many people from the lower class want to jump to the higher class. Many people in the higher class want to maintain at the higher class. So they may make use of improper ways to gain wealth, which may lead to backdoor relations and corruptions. The social part may not be that difficult to understand. It can create weaker social cohesion between the rich and poor, more tensions between the rich and poor. So the rich may be angry about the poor, dragging them down. The poor may be angry about the rich for exploiting them. If you have strong inequality, you have two groups of people being very different in needs and wants and mindsets. So it is very difficult for these two groups of people to find consensus, to decide on the direction where Singapore should go. The rich people may feel that Singapore should be like that and should move in this way. Then the poor people may think in the opposite manner. So they cannot gel together to find a common direction. In political sense, when people are unhappy, angry, and unstable, definitely you will have discontent and instability in politics. History has shown that revolutions, unrest, and government collapses being caused by people being angry about their current lives, and people being angry about the unfairness of certain people getting so much things and then they get so little things. But in actual fact, it is not possible and not feasible and not realistic to expect absolute equality. Many real-life experiences and studies have shown that people are actually quite okay about having inequality. They are quite okay about having less than other people, provided that this inequality is done in a fair way. So their anger mainly comes from the unfairness. If the inequality is caused by an unfair way, that is the problem. The government has now been making attempts to manage this issue through various methods like this mentioned here. Whether they can work, we shall see. There is quite an interesting evaluation of the policy of progressive wage model from this link. It mentions how whether the model can solve the problem it wants to solve. If you're interested, I would encourage you to read. In 2021, the government announced to take 18 actions to help the lower wage workers. And this was publicly and widely publicized and reported. 18 actions took a lot. But if you look at the details of these actions, you will realize that they are just incremental changes of existing measures instead of creating new measures. So I state here incremental. And some of the measures are quite generic until you are not so sure how to pinpoint what is going to be done. If you read all these 18 actions, almost all of them are related to progressive wage model. If this is the case, then we want to ask some questions. If everything is related to PWM, it means that PWM must be super suitable and super robust. Otherwise, all the other downstream measures tied to it will not work well. Is PWM super robust, super suitable? Think about it. Then the other question to ask is, if this is the case, it also means that the government is banking on just one main method to solve lower wage problem. Is this fine or not? Think about it. Now we shall move on to another related topic. Social mobility is related to inequality because of the relationship over here. In very simple terms, social mobility is about how easy it is for a person to move from one socio-economic class to another. So if it is easy for you to move up or down the socio-economic ladder, there is more social mobility. If it's harder for you to go up or go down, then there is less social mobility. So essentially, it's about like a reflection of how your family resources, family backgrounds, family connections can affect your future progress in life. The Singapore government has advised in recent years that Singapore has done relatively well in terms of social mobility. And the government likes to quote this data to prove. The government always say that, 14% of the young adults with parents in the lower percentile have moved to the top percentile, when US and UK are doing worse. So is this conclusion valid? Does this show that Singapore has more social mobility? The data is correct, but I have reservations that it can prove that Singapore has more social mobility, for various reasons. This generation is my generation, and we are a very special generation. We are special not because we ourselves are special, but because our parents are special. You cannot use a special case to conclude on an overall trend. Why are my parents special? Or why are their generation special? Our parents of that generation started work somewhere around Singapore independence. So, if you recall from lesson 7, I've said that during that time, most people are quite similar in financial footing and financial background. It is easier for people to cross from one level to another level. I've said that the difference between the 30th percentile and the 50th percentile is not great. So it's easier to move. But now, today, Singapore has become more stratified and has more inequality. It is harder to move up and down as compared to before. Furthermore, Singapore, at my parents' time, is somewhere around independence, around the start of independence. Singapore around when I started work is when Singapore was facing the peak of economic development. So when my parents started work, Singapore just had independence. When I just started work, Singapore had the peak of economic development. These two periods are full of opportunities and possibilities. Anything can happen if you have the ability or have the diligence or have the luck. It's more possible for you to go up, also possible for you to go down. But now, if you come to the current times, are you confident to say that the wealthier youth today do not have significant advantage over their poorer peers with their top education, extra tuition, high-tech gadgets, overseas trip to see the world, business connections of their parents, etc. I have no confidence. And if you want to do comparison between Singapore and other countries, comparison must be between apples and apples. For the case of Singapore, during my parents' time was a developing country with a dominant lower socio-economic class. So most people during my parents' time, they were of the lower class. Singapore during my time is a developed country with a growing middle class. When a country progresses from a developing stage to a developed stage, definitely you have more people moving up. When you are developing, you have more people in the lower class. When you are more developed, you have more people in the middle class. This is natural, it will definitely happen. But if you look at US and UK, US and UK during my parents' time are developed countries. US and UK during my time continue to be developed countries. Developing countries and developed countries have differences in structures and profile. You cannot compare like that. So if you really want to prove that 14% is good, we should compare Singapore with another country that has a similar growth pattern with Singapore. Whatever the case, the government has started to acknowledge that really social mobility has become an issue with one starting advantage becomes an lasting advantage. No matter what you say, it has been statistically proven that Singapore fits this curve quite well. This curve called Great Gatsby curve. This curve shows the correlation that when you have higher income inequality, you have lower social mobility. So if Singapore has high income inequality, it is unlikely that mobility will be very high. Yeah. You may be earning more than your parents as compared to the past, but you may still remain in the same social economic class as your parents. Social mobility may decrease in Singapore in coming times because the structures and possessions of the higher class and the lower class are getting more fixed. It is hard to change that, so it's hard to have people going up or going down. So if you want to raise social mobility in Singapore, you have to tackle the root issues, rather than just give more money to the poor, give more education to the poor, or give more jobs to the poor. You have to look at fundamental issues like this, mentioned over here. So it is about how to change the inherent way how the government, the society, and the economy works in Singapore. Okay, so the final section, we will talk a bit about the current situation of supply and demand manpower. So this is the current snapshot of manpower supply in Singapore. I have used the data from 2019 because the situation in 2020 to now is exceptional due to the pandemic. So the numbers during the pandemic do not reflect the general trend. So 2019 may be a more suitable choice to show what has always been happening in Singapore. So in general, Singaporeans only make up half of the workforce in Singapore. That is the truth. So about 50% only are citizens. So it shows our heavy reliance on foreign labor. To give more context to this data, I've tried to give you the comparison of Singapore population in the same year. So Singapore citizens make up about 61% in the population for 2019. Then when you do research, especially for your assignments, please note that when MOM refers states resident covers both citizens and PRs. And when MOM states local also refers to citizens and PR. So please make sure that you interpret the numbers correctly. The box here mentions something about the changes in manpower supply during the pandemic. As I said before, it has been an exceptional period. So during this period, the pandemic, the percentage or the amount of foreign workers dropped by a lot due to foreigners choosing to leave Singapore. Then after the countries have opened up one by one in 2022 last year, the amount of foreigners or foreign workers coming to Singapore increased by a lot. Yeah, within 1 year. Yeah, so you can see the percentage over here. For the case of Singapore, since 1990s, the change in workforce size and the change in population size is always mainly caused by a change in foreigner numbers. So if you look at numbers saying that workforce size increased by a lot or decreased by a lot, population increased by a lot or decreased by a lot, it is due to changes in foreigner numbers. To counter the manpower shortages due to the pandemic and to feed newer directions of recent economic strategies, the government has tried to boost hiring of foreign manpower after the pandemic via these approaches mentioned. However, the foreigner introduction or the foreign workers being introduced have become more targeted towards certain types and certain sectors. While the government tries to increase hiring and increase introduction of desired foreign manpower, the government also tried to introduce some measures to make sure that the amount of salary paid to foreigners feed the Singapore local market better, and the number of foreigners introduced into Singapore are kept at a more manageable level. If we put COVID-19 pandemic aside, the situation in Singapore is that we have been facing manpower shortages for quite a number of years. But this manpower shortage is mainly due to a relative issue than absolute issue. So manpower crunch is more in relative terms than absolute terms. In other words, it's trying to say that Singapore is having manpower shortage now, not so much because Singapore lacks humans, but because Singapore lacks suitable humans. You have a serious problem of job mismatch developing in Singapore in recent years. So Singapore has jobs available, Singapore has workers available, but they do not match. So the bosses find it harder to find workers, the workers find it harder to find jobs. Job mismatch is caused by various parties, all these parties shown here. Yeah. So it is useless if only one or two parties try to do something about it. We cannot change the world. Therefore, the government, the employees, the employers must all come together in order to solve job mismatch properly. These are further comments on the contributors to manpower shortage in Singapore. So these points are more related to lower end jobs, this one more related to higher end jobs, this more related to general across the board. I think some of the points have been mentioned earlier on, some of the points will be mentioned later on. So you can take this as a general summary. There are multiple causes of perceived manpower shortage in Singapore. So there should be multiple angles of solutions. Here are the multiple causes. Singapore has shortage not just because of the limited population size that people always overstate. We have manpower issues because of the lack of manpower compatibility due to job mismatch, lack of manpower efficiency due to low productivity, problem with manpower allocation due to how the government chooses and develops sectors, problem of manpower retention because you have people leaving the job market due to them being retirees or housewives or Singaporeans immigrating overseas. So you have to think in a broad spectrum of what to solve, because the causes is not just on one problem, one angle. In resource management, it's not simply viewing what you do not have and tapping on others, but also maximizing use of what you have and working around the constraints creativity. So for example, Singapore lacks water resources. So Singapore would try to work on water technology instead of just simply buying more and more water resources from foreign countries. Singapore lacks resources for strong goods production. So Singapore focuses on service sector instead of forcing herself to take in a lot of resources and to have heavy reliance on manufacturing. So this can be applied to labor as well. More and more organizations are actively leveraging on globalization, where the world is the tap and the world is the market. Then in the name of fitting globalization, the government tries to increase the competitiveness of the country and the employability of the people of Singapore. However, there is a need to strike a balance. While the government tries to cater to the bosses for the good of economy, the government should also cater to the workers for the good of society. Job security is not a given, but it should not be an utter forsaken. There is no such thing as iron rice bowl now entitled to workers. But workers should not be made to hold on to a tissue paper rice bowl that is unfairly fragile. Singapore government starts to pay more attention to fair employment practices due to the growing public voice. Traditionally, Singapore does not have strong legal protection against things like this. Yeah, there is not much strong legislation on these aspects, probably because of the pro-business and pro-employer stance of the government. So with the growing public voice, the government tries to show that I'm trying to do something about it, mainly through reconciliatory ways that are not legally bound, such as creating frameworks, setting up committees, and providing recommendations. So in general, the conclusion would be that we should strike a balance when it comes to managing manpower as a resource in economic sense, as well as managing manpower as human beings in social sense. You have to balance between the aspexia and the aspexia in totality. I shall close off the lesson by highlighting the example of COVID-19 pandemic as a specific episode challenging the labor market. So as you know, it has big impact on the jobs and employer and employee numbers. So this is just to show you that what I said just now. So during the pandemic, you have a big reduction, a record fall in foreign workers, and then after that you have a sharp increase, big increase in foreign worker numbers. So last year alone, we have more than 200K of foreign workers coming into Singapore. Then the sectors affected are different when it comes to residents and non-residents. So the pandemic has heavier impact on sectors that are high in global exposure and physical interaction with people. Depending on the profile of the company, some company will have overstaffing, some company will have understaffing. So with that, I will end the lesson. If you are interested, I will spend about 5 or 10 minutes on assignment 2. So those who want to leave can leave.